Yes, family, peace and love. Welcome back to the African Diaspora News channel with me, Richard Sudan. As ever, thank you for tuning in. Please like and subscribe and support the platform and spread the word and support independent black media. Now, there's a story which has been sort of circulating now for a week or two, which I kind of see periodically surface every now and again. And I find this story kind of both alarming and also amusing really at the same time, because it's kind of dressed up to be presented as anything other than what it really is. And the story I'm talking about is this kind of idea really of Anglo-Saxon identity, Anglo-Saxon values, Anglo-Saxon heritage. Now, I saw recently in the United States there were a number of politicians arguing, opining, talking about preserving these so-called Anglo-Saxon, parts of their heritage, Anglo-Saxon culture. Now, the funny thing is how Anglo-Saxon culture is dressed up to kind of these politicians anyway, we're talking about tolerance, valuing liberty, equality, all these kind of false notions really of what it actually is. And we have this every now and again in the UK, although the language will take different forms. You'll hear conversations about Britishness, about British values, and now and again you'll see the lexicon, the terminology talk about Anglo-Saxon values too. And of course, what we really know Anglo-Saxon culture to really mean, and there's many ways it's talked about, really this is just a code for Europeanism, for white supremacy in America, for American exceptionalism, and here obviously it's called British values. But really, you could just talk about kind of whiteness as an ideology, ultimately white supremacy as an ideology, because when we talk about the United Kingdom and we talk about, of course, the migration of Europeans, including the British, to the continent of America, we're talking about the colonization of human beings on the continent of America. And so whenever we hear this periodical argument of Anglo-Saxonism rear its head, it's nearly always happening because invariably racism is being challenged. White supremacy as the kind of underpinning foundation of these empires, the Anglo-American empire, is actually falling. Now, of course, as a result of what I believe will be the shortest lived empire in history, the Anglo-American Empire. Of course, you've had the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, the Ottoman Empire, all sorts of empires. But I believe this one has been the most brutal. Certainly the British Empire, in terms of the number of people that have died and been killed as a result of colonialism, is a colossally huge number. But this empire will actually be the shortest lived in history, possibly. That's my prediction. But now what you're seeing as we see the kind of social fabric, the economies of these empires basically being challenged as these empires fall, is racism rearing its head in a kind of last ditch sort of grasp to kind of hold on to itself and to redeem itself and to cling to power. Now, of course, in Europe, what you've seen is all sorts of different neo-fascist or right-wing, racist, nationalist movements spring up really all across Europe, across France, across Hungary, across Italy, and of course in Britain. In Britain, you had the whole Brexit move, which whatever anyone tells you it was about, I can tell you living here, the entire thing was predicated on a fear of the other, of a fear of black people, of a fear of people with a non-white skin, of a general fear of immigration, which is ironic because black people and immigrants to the United Kingdom really built the country, immigration in the last sort of 3 or 4 decades. And of course, as you all know, Britain actually was paid for, the industrialization of Britain was paid for by the money and the profits from the slave trade and the colonization, captivity, brutalization and murder of black people. Now, because we're seeing these societies really in their dying remnants, they're being challenged to their core. Racism is rearing its head in all sorts of forms. All sorts of leaders are being elected. All across Europe, you've had these different movements. Of course, in America, you had an open white supremacist. Donald Trump was elected to the presidency. Of course, all of the presidents maintain the system of white supremacy in the United States, but Donald Trump was a very open white supremacist. But of course, all presidents have upheld that same system. Now, of course, back to the Anglo-Saxon thing, one of the things you're really seeing is a desperate attempt to cling to an identity and actually cling to it with a false notion of what it really is. All these ideas about Anglo-Saxonism somehow being, tolerant, open, progressive, all this kind of nonsense really isn't true. It's just a kind of codified word for colonialism, European exceptionalism, white supremacy, and the ideology and paradigm of whiteness. And it's always interesting that those, some of them are open, some of them, you have these kind of alt-right figures that talk openly about how they try to argue that colonization was a good thing and a good thing for the people that it killed and affected. But you have a lot of people that try and dress this kind of silly notion of Anglo-Saxonism, Europeanism, Britishness, whiteness, whatever you want to call it. They try to dress it up as something other than what it really is. One thing that really sprung to my mind when I saw these conversations about Anglo-Saxon culture being preserved in its values, one thing I wanted to bring to your attention, which you may or may not know about, which I think is fascinating, regarding the conversations about kind of British values and Anglo-Saxonism, etc. Here is something which really flies in the face of the history that a lot of people are desperate to really cling to here. Now, of course, here people talk about British values. They talk about the British royal family. Of course, the British royal family have their roots as a German family, but this is something, of course, that gets forgotten and gets lost by the people that are brainwashed into believing it. Now, there is a skeleton and the remains which were found quite a few years ago now in Britain. And these remains and this skeleton was of the oldest recorded remains, the oldest remains of a person found in Britain. And this, these remains, this skeleton was thought to be, I think, about 10,000 or so years old. So this is the oldest Britain that we have. This is the oldest evidence, the oldest remains of the oldest Britain ever found, and it's 10,000 years old. And in recent years, because of modern technology, they were able to use technology and DNA and the technology they use to basically take a sample of DNA from this skeleton, and they were able to reproduce exactly what the oldest Britain that we know of actually looked like. And lo and behold, what the oldest Britain recorded so far that we know of actually looked like really flew in the face of the notions of what a lot of people in Britain really wanted it to look like. Take a look at this.
I'm Chris Stringer. I'm a research leader in human origins at the Natural History Museum in London, and I'm holding here this wonderful reconstructed head of Cheddar Man. And I've been studying the skeleton of Cheddar Man for some 40 years or so. And now with DNA technology, we've got the whole genome of Cheddar Man. And here we've got a scientific reconstruction of what he looked like. We've got his hair form, his skin, his blue eyes, and that dark skin colour, that combination really striking. And getting out of here information about his biology, the fact that, for example, he couldn't digest milk because that came in with the advent of farming after the time of Cheddar Man. So we're getting his whole biology, how he relates to people in Europe at the time, and how he relates to people in Britain now.
So as we can see, the oldest Briton ever recorded was actually a person, a man with black skin, known as Cheddar Man. Now this really flew in the face of the ideals and the notions that a lot of people had around Britishness. And of course, there's a lot of people in the US who really somehow believe that they are this kind of idea of Anglo-Saxonism is something which was really indigenous to the continent of America. It really wasn't. These people live in a delusion. So this whole thing about kind of identity is really the one of the final symptoms of people desperate to cling to a sort of psychology which they feel underpins and justifies the very brutal history of European colonialism. And this isn't really a new thing. We see it surface from time to time in the political class amongst ordinary people, but certainly in Britain I think it's really worth reminding people that the oldest recorded Briton that we know about was actually a black person. Similarly in America, it's amazing how many places were named after Columbus. Christopher Columbus, the Italian white supremacist, and many of these places that were named after Columbus himself never actually reached. And of course, we all know that there were already black people on the continent before Christopher Columbus, long before Christopher Columbus ever reached there. And this is evidenced in a number of ways. Really, we know about the Booker. They came before Columbus by Dr. Ivan van Sertima, who documents all the evidence, which shows you a long presence and history of black people of African origin in the continent of America, way before any European ever set foot there. And of course, we know this to be true because it's also documented in Columbus's own writings. So yeah, I just thought this whole thing about Anglo-Saxonism in the news was interesting. I thought it was a good time to tell you guys about Cheddar Man. If you didn't already know about Cheddar Man, the oldest recorded Briton in history that we know of so far, 10,000 years old, was a black person. So the indigenous people to Britain were black. So anytime someone tells you about Anglo-Saxonism regarding the UK, remind them of Cheddar Man. It's a very interesting piece of history. So yeah, I just wanted to make a quick video talking about that for you. That's it for now from me. Thank you for tuning in, as always, to the African Diaspora News channel. Please support the platform, like and subscribe, spread the word about independent black media. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
In search of a financial opportunity to pay off student loans, a young black American woman moves to South Korea to work. As the author, Bootsy W. recalls culture shock and fun adventures in a country far from home, she's also faced with anti-black racism and featureism, quickly learning that white supremacy is practiced not only by whites, but by those that are categorized as people of color. Based on her 10 years of living abroad, the book Anglo-Saxonism compares and contrasts Korea versus the United States on subjects such as code, communal living, racism, effective protests, global alliances, warrior class, music, political correctness, health, aging, money, and the coronavirus. This blunt memoir is uncomfortable, humorous, and educational. Help fight propaganda and mainstream agendas by picking up a copy of Anglo-Saxonism on Amazon.com.
Hello everyone. Please make sure you subscribe to the African Diaspora News Channel app on these platforms.